What's up, Internet? Welcome to Once Over. I'm Kaylee, and with me today I have Corndiff and Luigi Greenberg, and we are going to be giving the Once Over to The Entity.
Yeah, I hate this whole thing. It's like a nightmare, and I can't wake up. I just want to get rid of it.
There will be spoilers.
Give it a good once-over.
Giving us the once over. Giving him the once over.
Give me a once over.
Down to give us the once over.
For a routine once-over.
Once over.
Oh, just once over lightly.
Welcome, Corndiff, Luigi. I am so happy to have you guys here today talking with me about The Entity, which of course is a 1982 film that is all about the supernatural, which is something that both of you know very much about.
Thank you for having us. This is really exciting, and this movie was nuts.
It was not the rom-com I was expecting.
There was some romance. I just wouldn't call it positive romance.
No.
This movie made me uncomfortable.
Yes.
I completely agree about that. So the reason that we're all talking about this movie today is because you guys have a show called Skeptical Robot where you investigate different hauntings.
Yeah, the point of the show is essentially to just debunk crazy claims, and we focus on the Warrens for a really long time because they made the largest amount of crazy claims.
Oh my God.
They were con men. They were just grifters, liars, and predators. And we've since moved on from the topic of the Warrens. We're moving on to some other things. But yeah, the show is about debunking the paranormal, and that's where we really focused. And I just couldn't think of anywhere else to start because they are just so well known. They have so many people who like the Conjuring movies, and they were actually even known before that. But ultimately, yeah, they were just liars. That's really all it comes down to.
I think that The Entity is everything that James Wan wanted to do with The Conjuring and all of those other sorts of films. And this movie, of course, is about a woman. In the film, it is Carla, who is relentlessly attacked by an invisible supernatural force, leaving her completely traumatized, wanting answers. And she seeks help from lots of professionals who all kind of think that she's crazy. But the entity's violent assaults are unrelenting. And she gets pushed to the brink of her sanity in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a definite there's a psychological terror to it too. I mean, it's no one believed her. She seemed crazy, but she couldn't do anything to stop this thing or prove to people that it was real.
Yeah.
So very uncomfortable.
It's just hard to talk about. It was just it was so awkward and weird. You know what's funny? I was actually describing the movie to my wife because I watched it alone.
I did too.
And I was just like, so this movie is about this woman who's getting raped repeatedly by a ghost, and then we learn it's multiple ghosts. But there are these brutal rape scenes acted out by one person, and my wife's face squinted, like she must have been a good actress, and I'm like, that's the thing, she was. Yes, I mean, you really were able to like see the brutality of this, but without the full picture of the violence of it, but regardless, it was still terrible. I just was like, I don't think I should be watching this. I mean, it just was dirty and gross and weird. But at the same time, you're only seeing one person on the screen. And I don't know. From a female perspective, what was it like for you watching this?
Well, before I get into the female perspective, I want to point out, not only is it one ghost raping her, but the two other ghosts that are raping her are dwarf ghosts, as far as I could tell, which I thought was hilarious.
I see. So what are you saying, that there were two more like them?
I guess so, but they seem smaller.
That got brought up, right? Like the doctor, someone said they're smaller or something like that. Yeah.
She described them as smaller but still powerful.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It is this movie is a challenge, and I think that I want to say thank you to both of you, because Luigi, you actually recommended that we talk about this movie, and I had never seen this one before. This is now my favorite haunting movie. This is
interesting.
My my new favorite supernatural movie. I think that it does a ghost story in a really unique way. That being said, it is extremely hard to watch because Barbara Hershey's performance as Carla is haunting, terrifying, harrowing, edge of your seat, and you have to sit with just her on the screen during all of those scenes.
Oh, you know what we haven't done actually is described the history of how we arrived at this movie. You were on our show, and you were wonderful, by the way. I can't give you enough praise. You were fantastic. And we were talking about the Snedeker family haunting, which was, again, a case handled by the Warrens. But when we looked into the true story of it, their claims were that they were being sexually assaulted by these ghosts. Everyone in the house apparently was being sexually assaulted by these ghosts. And then when we looked into the true story, it turned out that they, two of the people in the family had really enjoyed or were fans of this movie, The Entity, and that came out when the story started to match what they saw in the movie, and people started to have their doubts. That's where the idea came up from watching this, because I had not seen this. And I don't know that this would have been the type of movie I had recommended if I had seen. But that's what motivated us to watch this. So anyway, I just feel like we need to get that out of the way.
And I think this is a particularly interesting movie, not only because of that history that it had with I still can't say the Snedeker family, whatever.
They all had stupid names. It was a weird thing.
Every single person who the Warrens investigated had the dumbest name that I've ever heard in my entire life. But this movie struggled a lot when it first came out because it was contending with things like Poltergeist. Poltergeist had already come out, and it was a smash success. It was, one of the biggest movies of all time, arguably. And in addition to that, this movie came out right in I think it was the same month as E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Wow. So, it focuses entirely on rape. So this movie was set to fail from the get-go. There was no chance in heck that The Entity was going to succeed, which, again, I would argue is a travesty because I think it's wonderful and it does an incredibly good job of looking at the difference between fantasy and reality. And the thing that is so interesting both about movies and about the form of skepticism that you guys look at on Skeptical Robot is that we are all trying to figure out what the difference between fantasy and reality is. We like movies in the same reason that we like investigating these crazy claims of people who say that ghosts are raping them or doing whatever to them.
I mean, that's just such a good point, is that, and in this case, especially when you examine the reality of the situation, or at least the purported reality of the situation, is that exactly was the distinction that the scientists, if you want to call them scientists, were having trouble with, because there was a lot of evidence to suggest that there was fantasy, but then in their minds, there was a lot of evidence to suggest that it was really happening. No one could make a clear determination, and you're absolutely right. Not being there, not witnessing it, not having a story for ourselves, all we can do is rely on the purported facts. And this is a situation where there's a lot of, check marks in both of the fantasy and reality, at least for the people involved, situation that even they couldn't make a decision. So even the people who were purporting that they saw ghosts were still saying, well, yeah, we saw these ghosts and we saw these lights, but she also had a really bad drinking problem and might have been schizophrenic, and also lived in a condemned home that, that's not really a sign of mental health, but it doesn't help, an evaluation. And there were a lot of weird things about it. And the movie, I have to admit, the movie does such a good job of conveying fear without ever showing your villain. I can't think of another movie that's done that. That's really weird, where you are now afraid of an invisible villain, and at no point is it, well, I guess there is one point in the movie it's kind of shown, but you never see it. You never see it in action, And I had to admit, I was like, wow, this to some extent is like guerrilla filmmaking, like where someone who had a low budget would have to make this by, like Evil Dead. There you go. That's a good example. Evil Dead, the camera from the perspective of the Deadites was because they just didn't have money and you never saw them for at least a while. And just they couldn't afford those attack scenes. And I felt like this kind of had that vibe too, where it's like, wow, I'm afraid of something I can't see. I don't know. I don't know if it's there, and it does such a good job. I guess I'm trailing off into the actual analytical aspects of the film as opposed to the reality. So I'm sorry, I need to keep those separate.
Well, I like the idea of examining what makes the film so interesting. And I think for me, the thing that was a success was not only Barbara Hershey's performance, but in addition to that, the fact that almost all of the effects were done with practical effects. So all of the kind of effects we get to see, I've heard that people sometimes call this movie Entity, because you do get to see some Barbara Hershey boobies
But those
and
weren't
Bush
hers.
in addition to that.
But those weren't hers. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it was entirely a breastplate that was created with an effect so that it could look like there were fingers that were showing
Wait,
up on her breasts.
That's
And that
how
was,
that's how they did that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were like,
Oh my God. I was wondering how they did that.
so yeah,
it's
there
amazing,
were
right?
strings on the inside that they were pulling that were attached
Wow.
to it to make it look like it. So what's funny though is like if you look hard enough, you can kind of see the unnatural coloring of the skin, and it's like I'm sure you couldn't tell in the 80s, but
I don't know. That nipple looked very real to me.
I thought it was
looked
real.
but still
So-
it was weird. Yeah.
Corn Diff, the reason that it looks so incredibly real is because the person who was in charge and supervising all of the practical effects was Stan Winston, who also did Terminator, Jurassic Park,
Oh,
The
wow.
Thing, Aliens. I mean, we had an incredible special effects guy supervising everybody on this film. And you needed that for a movie like this because, Luigi, like you were pointing out, when you don't see the scary thing, it is hard to identify with it unless you're truly terrified and on the edge of your seat for the whole movie. Now, I would argue, though, that I don't think that the Entity is the only bad guy in this film.
Oh, yeah.
And I hate to say this. You asked me, Luigi, about how I felt about it as a woman, and I don't usually go off on a tirade about feminism because I generally don't agree with it. Usually I'm quite sexist, but I think that the entire point of this film is that men are the devil. That is, in every step of the way, the character of Carla is being traumatized by men. She's not being believed. She's being belittled. She is never helped. And she truly is one of the very few strong female leads that we get within cinema history, I would argue, that stands up for herself at every turn. And that's incredible.
It is. Now, the two I don't know what the two nerds at the end, they were trying to help
The
her out.
parapsychologist.
Yeah, they were
Nerd.
They were helping her for quite a bit, and I mean I think at least for a while they were viewed as good. I mean,
This is where Billy got the lightning. It was like it was lightning going into him, and he fell
By
down
lightning,
and broke
you
his
mean
wrist.
an
and-
electrical discharge?
I don't know what it was. It was like lightning was going into him, and I was
Ooh, like
on
an
the
arc.
couch.
Was it kind of like...
at the end they're like dumping liquid helium on everybody, but
So I would argue that the parapsychologists weren't ever helping her out. They were helping themselves out. I would argue that the parapsychologists all kind of, they mirrored the Warrens, right? The way that she ended up meeting the parapsychologist was she was experiencing all of these very traumatic events, and she overheard them talking about the paranormal in a bookstore.
The appearance of an apparition and the sudden movement of objects just don't occur simultaneously.
Excuse me. Excuse me, they do. I have them all.
And after she heard that, she introduced herself and she said, "These things are really happening to me." And at first, they don't even believe her. They're like, "Oh, that's not really happening."
Women.
They don't even believe their own crap.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about the female perspective, and it was funny because it was pretty ham-fisted. Like it was not trying to be subtle about that at all. And I don't know. It's just one of those weird things where I'm like, shit. If of course, from the skeptical standpoint, I'm like, I don't know if any of this happened, but if it did, I mean, she's obviously troubled, and why are they all just being jerks? But I felt like that was pretty clear. By the way, I just thought about it when you were talking about Stan Winston doing the body effects. You think Stan Winston has a nipple expert like on staff who's like that's just his job is to make very realistic nipples?
He's got a briefcase of nipples.
I imagine that there's not just a nipple expert, but there's a nipple color expert. Like, I bet that the person who created the nipple is not the same person who painted the nipple.
That blows my mind.
One of the things that I loved about this film was the pacing. This movie starts off really, really quick. Within the first 10 minutes, we already have 2 ghost scenes, which is insanity.
Oh, and remember the score, that weird score was oof, that just, and it was like it emphasized how grating and like uncomfortable it was. That made it it was so awful. Anyway,
it is some of the no, that's exactly where I was going with this. That it is some of the most tense music that I have ever experienced in a film. It's like this like
banging
ultra
on a piano.
heavy, intense beats. Yeah. And while this is happening, Carla's character, she started out one of those scenes. She like starts putting lotion on her leg, but she's only putting it on like, 1/4 size of her leg. It was a very awkward moment for me. That was one of the parts that I didn't like of this film. But after that, she is magically getting hit. There is a shaking lamp. There's a pillow in her face. And this is when the music is just completely going crazy. I later learned that music was also used by Quentin Tarantino in Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, wow.
Because he absolutely loves the entity, which makes a lot of sense. And this music is so, in the beginning of the film, for the first third of the film, for the first act of the film, where usually things are a little quieter, this music is in every single attack scene.
Yeah.
It dies off towards the later part of the film. The attacks no longer have that music in it. And I thought that was such an interesting choice to have the most intense stuff happening right out the gate.
Yeah, it definitely got my attention, and it was terrifying. I didn't even realize that it tapered off towards the end. But
I don't think I did either.
That's pretty good.
Huh.
I'm gonna have to
It's in
rewatch.
all of the attacks for the first third of the film, and then the second 2/3, none of the attacks. One of the characters that we get introduced to early on is Carla's son, Bill.
Strapping young lad.
Young lad. When I first saw them, I was like, mother and son?
Yeah.
That's boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yeah,
no?
it was odd. And Puerto Rican, she's very white, and I was like, what's the story here? It just didn't mesh, but whatever. I guess there was a story.
They were so close in age, and there's like these moments where she's like caressing him, like she's got like her hand on his neck, and I was like, no. Originally, there was going to be a subplot where there was an incestuous dream relating to Bill.
Oh no.
Supposedly, that's an element of the story, of the real story, was that I don't know if that actually happened, but psychologists were trying to press it on her that was what was causing these delusions, was that she, again, to your point about men being the enemy, was that if I understand it correctly, now it's funny, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm not sure that I do understand it correctly, but supposedly the psychologists were suggesting to her, trying to plant the seed that the source of all of her problems was her undenied sexual interest in her son. And there's a brief moment where it gets mentioned in the movie where she's telling her friend, "Can you believe the psychology that he said this?" And I love Corn Dip's face right now with the gritting teeth. It's he's like, because that's how you feel in this movie. But I'm very glad they skipped it. But it is so weird knowing that fact, because I was scrolling through IMDb while watching the movie, and reading that prior to seeing an interaction between the two of them gave it context that I might not have picked up on myself. But I feel like it must have been an intentional choice by the director to make the son look close in age, to make that, what do you want to call it, theory, or make make that tension or that relationship feel like it's a possibility. And I was like, ugh, gross. I mean, if the movie wasn't gross and uncomfortable enough, now you throw that in. Ugh.
Again, this movie was set up to fail. Like, there was never any chance of a movie like this ever becoming popular because nobody would allow for it. You know, you can't. How do you say, oh, mommy and son are having a little thing while mommy's getting raped by dwarf ghosts? Like, that's not like a way that you can describe a movie and have people go to it.
Oh,
I don't know. If I were to hear that, I'd be like, I need to see this movie to believe it.
I feel like the dwarf. Yeah. Why do I feel like dwarf was the craziest part of that combination?
Ghost dwarf, not just dwarf.
Okay, yeah, ghost dwarf, not just dwarf.
How do you? Okay, the way that she describes it, if I remember correctly, she says, "I am getting assaulted by one person." And then there are two smaller things holding my legs down. If that's not dwarf ghost, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I think. Ugh.
They're strong but small.
Mm-hmm. You mean like children?
Oh, no. These aren't children. They're strong.
Dwarfs?
But, Poltergeist had the, the plot of being buried on an Indian or an old burial ground. That's the movie we need to make is, buried over an old circus. And the circus freaks are the ones haunting the house. I mean, there was so much about this. It's really funny because I really wanted to come into this with some sort of joke or comedy about it, and I really struggled. I was like, there's nothing to joke about this movie.
It's so hard to come up with anything joke-wise about this.
It's so uncomfortable. Yes, this movie is so hard to watch. But what's funny, though, is that I found out, it's like a big fan, or I'm sorry, there are so many film aficionados who are big fans of this movie. Martin Scorsese is apparently a big fan of this movie. Quentin Tarantino.
Clearly Tarantino.
Yeah, and I'm like, I mean, obviously there were just so many probably esoteric filmmaking things about it that were well done. But as just a, layman viewer, I'm like, dude, this movie creeps me the fuck out. So,
yeah.
Well, isn't that what makes you like a movie, though? So, like, when I'm thinking about watching a movie, the thing that I want to do every single time is I want to have emotions. I don't care if those emotions are happy emotions. I don't care if those emotions are sad emotions. I don't care if those emotions are, fuck, I am uncomfortable. Why the fuck am I watching this? I want to feel.
Yeah,
like that's the hour and a half that I want to spend. And I mentioned it a little bit when we were talking earlier, but the pacing of this movie was so interesting because when you suggested this movie, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, let's watch that. I then got a hold of this movie, and I realized that it was 2 hours long, and I was like, I'm gonna watch 2 fucking hours of a goddamn ghost movie? No, I'm not. Like, that's gonna be good. I was like, you can't make this movie good in more than 90 minutes. I want a 90-minute movie. I don't want anything more than that. This is gonna be trash. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time because it's so well shot. It's so interesting. There are little things that keep you guessing. For example, at one point, the family hears scraping on the floor. And we as the viewer were like, okay, well, is this going to be a ghost or is this going to be... I don't know if the movie is trying to sway me to be skeptical or if the movie is trying to sway me to believe her. So is it going to be a ghost? Is it going to be, And Bill, the son, goes into the crawl space and realizes that when he touches a pipe, it makes
Yeah.
that noise.
I never touched it before.
You know what's interesting is
But what touched the pipe the first time?
raccoons. You know what's funny is everything you're saying was exactly, I think, purposefully done, where you didn't
Yes.
necessarily believe anyone's story. Like there was really no reliable narrator in the story, and what you were experiencing from the camera's point of view as far as she was involved when she was getting assaulted was what either, you know, might have happened or what she believed was happening, and it might not have been clear
Yeah.
until the entrance of Mo Green, Alex Rocco, who just, I mean, consummate scumbag in every movie he plays, shows up, and there's that one moment where it was funny because I thought to myself, this is ambiguous. It's going to continue to be ambiguous. And I started to kind of just lazily watch where I'm like, come on, like, you know, just get on one side of the fence here. And then boom, we have this moment where Alex, I forget the guy's name. I forget his name in the movie, but yes, Mo Green, Alex Rocco. In my mind, he's always Mo Green, walks in on her getting assaulted and witnesses it. And I'm like, oh, now we've actually taken a side in this argument and we now have a witness to it. And that's where it really started to actually, in my opinion, be a more enjoyable movie, because I didn't want to just sit and watch her struggling and being assaulted. I was, you know, but now that there is now this physical manifestation that is being witnessed by a third party, we're now saying, okay, now we've determined that this is real for the movie's sake. And now this adds another element to the story, and he leaves. You know, we get the impression that he just couldn't take it or he was overwhelmed or whatever. And I'm like, okay, now we're getting emotional about this. And that's where I really felt like that, what you're saying, you want to feel something. I felt like it was pretty soulless until that moment. That's when the emotion kicked in, for me at least, where I'm like, now I'm invested because of the fact that there are people who are saying that they're being affected by it, which means it's more real, or at least the movie's taking the position that it's more real.
Yeah.
And for the sake of entertainment, I'm now getting more invested in these characters and the story itself. But that's just that's my journey. I don't know if anyone else felt the same way.
I had a similar experience earlier on in the film. Her friend Cindy also gets to see an event, a much less intense event.
Yeah.
But I liked it when other characters were kind of getting sucked in. And again, in the real world, do I believe that any of this is happening? No, not really. But in this movie, I do. And I believe that she is suffering, and I want to understand, and I want people to support her, and nobody does.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it shines a lot of light on things that you guys look at on Skeptical Robot. For example, that she had a treacherous childhood. For example, that she was about to get, I noticed something that you guys taught me, which is she hadn't paid her rent and she was about to get evicted from her house. I don't know if you guys picked up on that.
Yeah, you see that she's struggling financially with mouths to feed. Really, ultimately, you know, the first question of being a good skeptic is, who stands to benefit from you believing something? That's the first question. Who stands to benefit from you believing in ghosts? Who stands to benefit from you believing in religion? There's always someone, and there's always someone willing to make a buck or save themselves. And so by her telling a story with the Snedekers, a similar story was, the story is they were behind on their rent and they were in a dire situation with their son having cancer. So they said, you can't kick us out. It's haunted and we're going to start having people here and you're going to get famous. We're going to get famous and we're going to pay you all this money. And great question. And the fact that you're saying that we taught you something when we're just all about making fart jokes and laughing at stupid people. Wow. That's great. That makes my day.
Come on, you guys taught me lots. It's all about fart jokes. I love it. So one of the things that I thought was interesting also about this movie, and Luigi, you kind of touched on this a little bit also, is that we're seeing things from a perspective. And again, we don't have necessarily a reliable narrator, but what we do have is we have the cinematographer of this film. Mm-hmm. And so he's showing us what we need to see. And there were times where I really, really liked how the cinematography was done. And then there were times where I really, really struggled with it. So for example, there's like a moment where like we're kind of like zooming in on a lamp, like one of those old school kind of like those, it's like a gas lamp that's converted into a newer one, and the lamp kind of like ebbs and flows while the camera zooms in and out. But the thing that really drove me insane is that, especially during all the sequences when we get introduced to the doctors, they're always at these Dutch angles. Are you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
The slanted.
Ron Silver is never in the center of any shot.
I loved that, actually.
You did?
I did.
You
I liked
you
the
like
weird
the
angles.
tilty like this?
I did. I enjoyed it. I was like, well, this is different.
And it's funny because it seemed to be, to some extent, the way the film introduced distrust. The Dutch angle makes them look sinister, but it was used a little too much, especially in the office where all of the doctors were like having lunch. I'm like, why is it necessary here?
So I'm interested in both of your opinions about all the doctors. So we have a lot of doctors. Well, let's kind of go through the characters a little bit. So of course we have Carla, who is the main character, who's getting raped by the dwarf ghosts. We have her best friend Cindy, who I would argue is kind of a throwaway character. Maybe we don't need her so much. We need her to see one of the events, but other than that, whatever. She's taking care of the kids when Carla is going through crisis.
I actually have a lot to say about the friend, but we'll get to it. Go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
No, tell me now.
I feel like the friend, maybe not more so, but definitely in the ballpark of what you suggested earlier about being very ham-fisted, the movie being very ham-fisted about distrust of men. You see that her life is run and dictated to an uncomfortable degree by a man. And you see that he is worthless, at least as far as emotion is involved, or, he seems like a practical person, but at the same time, an asshole. But we don't get enough of him to really get like a full picture, but you see his effect on the friend. And so that's what my suggestion is, fully in line with what you're saying. It's right with the theme of being distrustful of men. It's saying, look what men do when you're married to them. They turn into lazy assholes. Was he demanding coffee and like yelling at her to get him coffee while she's trying to comfort her friend? I'm like,
In a minute, George.
there was a very, very obvious theme there, and I felt that the friend was basically a tool for portraying that theme, or at least getting that theme across a little more clearly, or at least piling on.
I think that you're totally correct about that. I do. I thought that the character, so Cindy's significant other, her husband, is George. We don't see him for more than 30 seconds on the screen, I feel like.
Honey,
What?
you ready to go?
Yes, I am, George. Just give me a minute, please.
Yeah, at most.
Yeah, you hear his voice constantly, but you never really see him.
He walks through, and when they come back in the house while it's getting trashed,
And then
you see him for
they're
that.
going to a wedding when it's dark outside. That was one part I was like, it's dark outside. You're going to a wedding, but he was like, come on, let's go. When he's like pushing her out to,
that's
to
right.
go. But it's funny though. There's a dichotomy, and I'm probably a real hypocrite about this, where I'm calling him a jerk, but I have to admit, I'd have the exact same reaction of like, she's crazy. Don't let her into our house. She's going to wreck our house.
Yeah, make your crazy friend shut up. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
yes.
exactly what. That's I despite the fact that he clearly is representative of the male being a bad guy, I don't think he ever did anything that was wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, the demanding coffee was kind of a dick move, but
he had a shit tone.
Who hasn't done that? Who hasn't done that?
Yeah.
yeah. There's a word I'm looking for, and I don't know why I'm struggling, but it was man, what's the word I'm looking for? Disregarding that's not whatever.
Dismissive.
Dismissive. That's the word I'm looking for. Dismissive. He is dismissive of everything. Men, I'm sorry, not he is representative of a dismissive male pattern in this movie. That's what it all is every man is dismissive. Oh my God, she's complaining again. And the doctors, the scene when the doctor is saying she masturbated, big fucking deal. And he's like, no, there's more to this. And he's like, no, there's not.
She's masturbating. This entire circus she's invented is to cover up what every little girl does.
You have a peer telling you, hey, maybe look a little deeper or whatever. He's not, and at this point, he's not suggesting ghosts. He is suggesting severe psychological illness. And even the doctor is saying, no, not even that. You know, like basically it's not column A, nor is it column B. And I don't have a solution, but whatever it is, whatever she's telling you the problem is, isn't the truth. And it's like, man, I like it. Yes, it just was so abundantly clear that this director was trying to say that men suck.
You know, it's so interesting also, before we go on to some of the other characters, and we'll get into the doctors a little bit more. When this movie came out in 1982, it was heavily protested by feminist groups.
Oh, that's interesting.
Women hated this movie. Women were like, it glorifies, this is supporting men. And I watched this movie in my 2025 gaze, and I'm like, this is the most feminist movie that I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I've never seen a woman, I've never seen this woman does it all. She's going to school so that she can become a typist. She is taking care of the home. She takes care of all of her kids. She's doing all of the things that she needs to do in her family. And she's still a strong female lead, despite the fact that men are constantly trying to oppress her. And I'm like, this is feminism 101. Like, I fucking hate women. I fucking hate women. And I literally watched this movie and I was like, whoa. Women are cool. Like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, I had like a mind-blowing experience with this movie, and women in 1982 were like, this bitch is horrible. We hate her.
Man, that's, I guess it was just the mentality of the time. I can't even see how this could be perceived as that. That seems odd because it's like I said, I'll keep using the same term, ham-fisted. It was not even subtle about saying, hey, here's a woman trying to convince men that she is in trouble, and men. It's a lot like the movie The Accused, except you replace the real people with ghosts. And I mean, it sounds silly, but that's really what it is. And I was actually talking to my buddy Looney Tunes critic about this movie, and he said, "Can a ghost be Me Too'd?" And I was like, I don't know. And then he said, "Me booed?" And I was like,
yes,
that's really dumb joke. But it made me laugh.
But also, yes.
but also
yes. This movie was so protested when it came out that Barbara Hershey, the star who plays Carla, she got accosted constantly, and she ended up having to do a public response. And she told a reporter, I resent being put in the position of defending this film. We worked really hard to not make it exploitative. Rape is one of the ugliest, if not the ugliest thing that can happen to someone. It's murder of a sort. I have no answer for those people who are offended. And I think that is the perfect response. And fucking men to her for being like, no, you guys are idiots. You're all being stupid. My overglorified boobies that are getting fingered by a ghost effectively are beautiful. And it's important that we're talking about it. Not only do they talk about women being oppressed by men, but at one point, the character of Carla is turned on and has an orgasm while she's being accosted by a man. And
a ghost.
A man ghost. I'm assuming that the ghost is a man. Perhaps I'm making jumps.
Wasn't that while she was asleep?
Yes. That. So here's what I'm curious about. To go back to what you were saying about the dream sequence, I'm kind of curious if that is where that
I think so.
Dream sequence was supposed to go, and that would have just made it so much more grotesque. Yeah. I don't even know how to.
Very
handle that.
uncomfortable. Very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really important thing to explore. And again, I don't understand why women in 1982 didn't understand the feminism of this.
Yeah, it's really compelling. Like, I'm kind of curious, like what the belief was to say that it was somehow anti-feminist or just or misogynist, whatever you want to call it. How it wasn't a full-fledged, indictment on men's dismissive behavior of women. Like, it's really what I thought it was. Like, how is it perceived as anything else? Or
I do have an answer for that.
Oh, please. Yeah,
It's that women, in particular women who are a part of women's rights groups, are stupid. That's the answer to that. That's like,
you're allowed to say it. I'm not.
yeah, I know. So the other thing that I will say as a woman representing the women on this panel, is that I think it's important that the movie dives into the idea of her having a sexual gratification from being accosted in a way that she didn't want to be. I think that if you asked almost any woman, there has been a time, and perhaps this is also true for men, but I'll speak for women and for my friends who I have spoken to about similar topics. I think that almost any woman can say, at one point in my life, I was really turned on by something that felt really icky and I didn't like it. And I felt like I was effectively getting raped, whether that be literal or figurative. I felt like I was getting raped in one way or another. On the other hand, I was super, super, super fucking turned on. I think that is a common thing that we go through as women. And the fact that this movie dives into that and does it in a much more succinct and thoughtful way than I just described it is amazing. Like, that's huge. That's huge. You don't get movies talking about stuff like that. Yeah, no. That's a smart choice.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Did I make it worse than the movie?
I just don't know what to say. Wow.
No.
I get it. I just don't feel qualified to have an opinion.
All right, well, let's move on from that. I won't force you guys to respond to that. Let's talk a little bit about all of the different doctors and parapsychologists that we get introduced to in this movie. Before we do that, I want to point something out to you that I loved.
Okay.
Which is, I am a big fan of kaiju films. I love Godzilla. I love all that shit. And I think that I could make a legitimate argument that The Entity is actually a kaiju film without kaiju. Because we get a psychiatrist going up against parapsychologists, whatever the fuck they're called, going up against the people in the life. And it's very similar to how in kaiju films we get the opposition of the military, the scientists, and the government. And I think that this movie does that, and it's really exciting for me.
Huh.
It's funny. Okay, so this may be skipping ahead, but because you said that, this is actually a lingering question I had since I watched the movie, is in the scene at the end when it gets frozen, I could not tell the scale of it. And I was curious, was it supposed to be human-sized or was it supposed to be giant? Because just the effects just weren't good, and I just couldn't figure that out. So do you have an opinion on that? Because that could lead to your kaiju theory. This could have been a kaiju.
We'll describe a little bit more of that as we continue,
okay,
but
okay.
I will say, before we get to it, to me, it was Titanic iceberg sized.
That's what I thought. It looked huge. It looked enormous.
I didn't even think about it being a kaiju in that sense.
But I'm seriously, it was like an illusion where I just my eyes couldn't focus on the scale of it. I'm like, in relation to the room, what's the size of it? But if you remember, they were in that huge facility, so maybe it's that big. It was just weird. And also, I said this to Corn Diff earlier. If they were using liquid helium, wouldn't everyone in the room be talking with a squeaky voice?
Yeah.
That would have been my movie.
I had some issues with the end of the movie. But okay, so let me introduce the different doctors that we get to talk about. So the first one that we meet is Dr. Schneiderman. Dr. Schneiderman. None of these people's names ever make any sense to me. So Dr. Schneiderman he kind of looks like Ellis from Die Hard. That was like all that I could think about ever. He kind of gave me like porno vibes, and I'm interested in what both of your takes were on his relationship with Carla, because he becomes her psychiatrist.
Hey, can I actually just real quick? I'm sorry, I know we're jumping around here, but
No,
I do
you're
want to
fine.
go back to your topic that I was too afraid to talk about. And now that I think about it, I actually do have something that I'd like to ask about it. Is
Yes.
that when you say, and I'm not at all trying to pry, but when you say that a situation like that is like a common thing for women, do you feel that that this movie addressing it was an attempt to relate that concept to tell women it's okay, or was it a concept to ask women to reevaluate something like that? What would be the purpose of addressing something like that from a film standpoint?
That's a really good question. Maybe I'm naive in this, but I generally think that when movies address things, it's because they want people to feel seen and heard.
Oh, okay.
I feel like it's whenever a movie addresses anything, and again, perhaps this is naivety, perhaps this is hopefulness, I feel like it's because the movie wants me to not feel so alone. And so here I am getting to experience Carla having this horrible experience and then having to deal with the emotions of, holy shit, I liked it. I'm not supposed to like it. This is my abuser who is coming at me here. I shouldn't have enjoyed this in the way that I did. I think that is asking me as the viewer, as the voyeur, to sit with those feelings, and for me that means I'm not alone in them when I have them.
You're like planting these little seeds of things that I never thought about, but somehow I feel like I subconsciously still picked up on. In their sum total, you put them all together, this feels like a movie made for women. With you saying that is making me feel that, as uncomfortable as I was with this movie, that it was brilliant in its own way.
I love this movie. I swear to God, this is my new favorite supernatural movie that has ever existed. I thought it was going to be a drudge and I was going to hate every single moment of it, but I could talk about this for another 5 hours. I have notes about every single character. I have thoughts about every single moment. I could dissect this movie minute by minute and we still wouldn't have enough time to be able to discuss all of the things that I enjoyed about it. Here's maybe something that might make it more relatable outside of the scope of men versus women and just relatable in your everyday. Let's say that something bad happens to one of your coworkers. They pop a tire on the way to work and that's really annoying for them. Mm-hmm. And then you enjoy that. You're like, haha, sucker. Yeah. Sucker. Like, fuck you. You're the worst asshole that I've ever met in my entire life. But you also feel guilty about having those positive feelings because that's just another human. It's not the perfect example, but I think that's sort of what's going on in that sequence when she is having this orgasm, is that she's experiencing I shouldn't feel this way, but I do.
And was an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
I often watch movies where I think to myself afterward, there's a deeper meaning to this. I just don't know what it is. and I feel that frequently where I'm like, I feel like this movie's trying to send me a message that I'm just not receiving. Yeah, this movie was trying to make a point to women, and it's becoming more and more clear.
Corn Diff, I want to hear a little bit more about your general thoughts about this movie. How did you go into this movie? Were you expecting to like it? Were you expecting to hate it? And what were your initial thoughts when you came out of it?
I was expecting to hate it and have a hard time getting through it, and I was certain it was going to take forever. They start off so fast with the shit that makes you want to look away. It's just, it grabs your attention and then it just doesn't let go. And then it's something like every 5 minutes it feels like happening. And then before I knew it, it was at the end of the film. We keep saying it was awkward to watch and tough to watch because of those scenes, but it was, and it felt like it was halfway to a Cannibal Holocaust or an I Spit on Your Grave type of feel.
Like an unbearable movie.
This was harder for me to watch than either of those, I think.
Corndiff, it did have our favorite trope in it. Demons driving cars.
Oh, yeah, it did.
Let's kind of move forward towards the end of the movie. We didn't dive too much into the doctors. Again, I would argue that it's kind of that idea of like the kaiju film where you have all of these different entities opposing each other. Everybody has an opinion and everybody wants to be the correct one.
The doctors, I thought, were a huge element to the story. While telling the story of not trusting men or suggesting that you don't trust men, it is also giving you examples of why not to trust them, as opposed to just, making a statement without giving any support. And then when those doctors come in, they're just dismissive of the dismissive guy. And I don't know. I feel like that's just was really good way to, I don't want to say complicate the story, but make it a little bit less surface, just surface area story. It's giving you a little bit more motivation as to what's frustrating her, why she's getting annoyed, how it's all affecting her, and it's ultimately just rolling downhill.
It was very thoughtfully done, and again, it was very similar to what I've heard you guys describe on Skeptical Robot, which is the idea of everybody wants to profit in some way, so they wanted to use her for their own means. I felt like at one time, the parapsychologists, the two guys who are trying to get her to do all of these different experiments in order to be able to figure out what the entity is, when they're talking with her and when they're doing things with her, it's because they want to get ahead in their careers. When Dr. Schneiderman is doing things with her, it's at first I think that it's because he wants to help her, and then I think it's because he has a giant raging boner for her, and he is very jealous of that ghost.
Carla, I care about you.
And so, it's all about what their motives are, and that's a lot.
When we start to see that he is in fact possibly interested in her sexually, it seems less disgusting in context. When you hear a psychologist hitting on his patient, you're like, oh, that's terrible, that's an awful story. But in the context of all this other shit going on, you think for just a moment, maybe he really cares. and this is kind of a result. The sexual feelings are kind of a result of his care.
I think that you thought about that way too hard in all of the most beautiful ways. I think he's a perv.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I will say he is the best thing that he is the closest thing that she has to a protector other than her son, who she wants to bang. So I don't really know who the good guy is in that situation,
That's hard to argue with. I'm saying how it appeared. I'm not saying that there's in fact a good guy here, but it for the audience's sake, who else is there? There's just no one else. And maybe you just start to fall in love with someone you care about,
So tell me a little bit more before we get into the end of the movie about the real life case. So remind me what the real life girl's name was.
Her name was Dorothy Bither.
And it was in California in 1974, I think. Someplace around 8 to 10 years before this movie was made.
Yes, and there was a novel made in 1978, I believe, and the movie was made 4 years after that. But I actually found an interview with all of the parapsychologists that claimed that they were there in the house. But it was on an old show, if you remember, a show called Sightings.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Some people distinctly remember it. Some people do not. I do. Terrified the shit out of me as a kid. Do you remember Sightings, Corndiff? I know we've talked about it on the show.
I do not, unfortunately.
So yeah, Sightings had a segment where they interviewed the two parapsychologists. These two guys are fully committed to saying that they saw these lights. They took pictures of the lights. It what do you call it? Blanked out their camera where all you could see is just white, like, whatever you call it. Is that flushed it out? Whatever.
Overexposed.
Overexposed it. blown out, whatever. They're showing these pictures saying that, yeah, we took these in the house and they're overexposed. Look, and it's just a picture of just pure white. And it's like, oh yeah, that's proof of ghosts, right? And then he's saying, we took these pictures of these orbs, and it's just pictures with some white spots on it. And,
Yeah.
it's just it's all nonsense. But then they start getting into a kind of a composite story that was briefly discussed in the movie when they start seeing those really bad electricity effects in the room, and one of them is looking under a microscope and says, "It looks like a man's torso." So that actually comes from these two morons. But what's so funny is that all of these stories are also accompanied with, oh yeah, she also might have been schizophrenic. She also had a terrible drinking problem. Her kids apparently talk about her being abused frequently. They lived in this condemned home. So much conflicting information from the same source. And then supposedly, yes, she moved from the house in California, moved to Texas, I believe, was where she was supposed to have moved, and it followed her for 5 years and then stopped.
Spooky.
And then just one day stopped. And apparently they lessened in severity and trailed off.
That supports the idea of her getting enough therapy that her figurative demons are no longer haunting her. And that is a lot of what this movie explores. So it sounds to me like this movie did pretty closely follow her story. Would you agree with that?
The alleged story.
Her alleged story, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are definitely some things that didn't happen, like the thing with the ice, and that is where the story just goes off the rails. I was like, you really had me for a compelling horror movie. I'm a huge horror fan. I love horror movies. I just hate when they say they're based on a true story. And but yeah, so then all this stuff about putting her in this confinement, apparently none of that happened. And no, they did not freeze the ghost with liquid helium. That is insane. But I do want to mention something that I saw on the IMDb facts while watching this movie. A video game adaptation was developed by 20th Century Fox in 1982 for the Atari 2600 for this movie. Though it was never officially released, a playable prototype surfaced years later and is available online.
What characters can you play as? Like, why did they make this? That's the full extent of what the game looks like. Thankfully, you have a secret weapon up your sleeve. Liquid helium.
Yes.
By tapping the fire button, you can give the entity a little squirt of the old HE and slow him down for a bit. Okay, the old helium.
So you have to avoid helium also. Like that's one of the
It's just like the end of the movie. Wait, when does she get raped in the game?
I did a search for that word and it didn't come up with anything that indicated that was a goal or a milestone.
Oh my god. Do you have to be Carla? You guys, you can experience what I was finally talking about. You're going to understand the woman's experience finally.
Fight orgasm. Press B.
Oh, God.
Do not fuck son.
One of the things that this movie did remind me of actually was Hellraiser, because of the little electric fields that the ghost is creating at one point. I was like, oh, it's like the end of Hellraiser. Look at that.
It looks like those beams that used to come out of those electric balls that were really famous in the 80s. What were those called? Tesla balls or something like that. It didn't look... it's funny. So Barbara Hershey is an amazing actress in this movie. Like, this was a really, really unusual role to commit to and do so well. She's really convincing that you really are getting these terrible emotions from her in these outrageous and ridiculous scenarios. But I will have to say, my one criticism was the scene where she starts yelling at the electricity. I was like, oh, stop that.
He can't touch us!
Like she had the upper hand on it at that time.
Die, you bastard! Die!
It was like shit talking to electricity, and I was,
Yeah.
it was a little cringy. I was like, this is where she's like, yeah, you coward, I'm not alone. And I was like, all right, we get it. But it went on a little too long. And yeah, there were just so many moments in this that just made you feel uncomfortable and weird and gross.
I feel like she redeems herself a little bit. I like in the final scenes when we get to the iceberg, which we'll start talking about in just a moment here. She says something to the effect of, you can kill me, but you can't have me.
You can do anything you want to me. You can torture me, kill me, anything. But you can't have me.
And I liked that. And I thought that that was a very powerful moment. And for her character, it was very necessary.
I do remember that distinctly because we were supposed to like get the message from her that this is where she was now at this point with her sanity.
All right. Well, I feel like with all this helium talk, we got to get into the end of the movie.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. Basically what happens is that Carla gets so frustrated with everything that's going on that she agrees to let the parapsychologists create this extremely elaborate experiment, whether they are in a gymnasium and they build a replica of her house.
It's like the prison from James Bond. Like she's given this unique living experience that's away from society.
I just kept thinking, how did this, even in movie world, how did these science guys have the budget to pull this off?
Exactly one of the questions I asked.
Overnight too. This was all created to look like her house overnight in this state-of-the-art prison facility.
That Ty Pennington guy saying, move that bus or something like that. I've never seen a quick turnaround like that.
Well, if you guys want to see the house, you know what to say. You got to say it with me. Bus driver, move that bus!
And not only that, but they make it they go above and beyond to make this quote unquote realistic. So again, this is where the movie diverts from the real story, if we can call it that. They're like, well, we don't have any light switches in the house because we have to control the electricity. And then they're like, oh, well, the only room that has a ceiling on it is the bathroom because obviously humans want to have one room of privacy. That's like, that's like Big Brother shit. Like, why are we going into all of those details? Like, just say like, oh, you created her bedroom and here it is. And that way she can be slightly more comfortable. What? Because clearly at that point, the entity was already following her around because it attacked her when she was at her friend Cindy's house.
It went into an odd amount of detail about here's how you place your card if you want to get out, and you have to stand in this corner, and the only corner that does not have camera access is over here. I mean, literally while watching the movie, I thought, why is this necessary? It was really odd.
If anything could have been cut out of this film, that would have been the stuff that I would have cut. That being said, it was interesting. So their plan is that they are going to get the entity to show face or to show up or whatever it's going to do. They're going to get the entity to exist, and then they're going to blast it with liquid helium, which will freeze it. And then when they touch it, it will just crash into a million pieces. So if the entity has any mass, this will prove the existence of ghosts, and also it will rid Carla of her troubles.
It will also murder a ghost.
Sound science.
This movie was so well done and serious, and suddenly I feel like I'm now watching a comedy. It had this shift of tone,
it's like it was the second half. It's like that ending was directed by someone different, maybe.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point.
Or written by someone different.
Okay, so also now I'm not a chemist, and you guys have mentioned the helium thing a couple of times. My understanding is that liquid nitrogen will do what they describe. Does liquid helium also do that? I've never even heard of liquid helium.
Corndiff is a scientist. Let him explain it.
No, from what I looked up, it is very well to get it in a liquid form. It has to be like extremely cold.
okay, so like you're the writer of this movie and you're like, okay, what am I going to do? And like, I don't know, nowadays, at least within the last 20 years, people use liquid nitrogen to do things like make ice cream. So like, that's a thing that I would say not everybody in society is aware of, but like a fair number of people are. Why would you choose liquid helium?
I guess because it is significantly colder. Liquid nitrogen is, and I, as you can tell, I just Googled this, negative 320 degrees Fahrenheit, liquid nitrogen. Liquid helium, negative 452.
It's okay. So the other thing that drove me absolutely bonkers about the end of the movie. So again, Dr. Schneiderman at this point, he is like, I love Carla.
Carla, I care about you.
And I'm going to go protect her. And so he tries to convince her not to go through with this experiment because he's worried about her safety. And she's like, no, I'm going to do it because I would do anything to not have to deal with this entity ever again. So he leaves. And when he's leaving, the parapsychologists are like, you get out of here. You're not allowed back in here ever. And when shit goes awry, he just shows back up again. I'm like, how did he get in here? Who let him in?
They didn't have any money left for security after they built the damn house, I guess.
No, they literally told some security guy that they weren't. It doesn't make any sense.
That's always funny to me in movies when there's like arguments or contention between characters with no basis for it. But that's what this was, you know, he was just saying, hey, don't do this. And they took it offensively and were like, how dare you, sir?
I wouldn't say that it was no basis. I would say that their basis was they were about to get very rich off of this. They think that they are about to prove that ghosts exist, which means that they are about to be very, very rich people. So again, in the same way that you do, we got to follow the money trail. We got to follow the incentive trail. And I think that both characters or both sets of characters have very heavy incentives. So I do understand why they're kind of battling it out. I just don't understand why it's fucking necessary. Like, I would have been just as happy if it didn't happen.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, it's one of them wants to make money off of her, the other one wants to fuck her.
Yeah.
You know, those are both pretty valid arguments or things to argue about. But one thing I didn't get about the movie when all that shit happened, I rewound it like 3 times thinking I missed something, was when Schneiderman's boss denies seeing anything. I was like, what was the purpose of...
I liked that.
But I couldn't understand the purpose of it. Like, if the whole point of this scene was to suggest that there was objective physical evidence, why are we now backtracking to say that it was ambiguous? I didn't get it. I just didn't understand the point of that.
You know, it's interesting that you didn't enjoy that because I think that the point of that scene was for the skeptics. I would argue that the reason that that scene existed was to say, how much do you have to see before you believe it as a skeptic? Is what I feel like that scene was questioning.
I keep forgetting that they're claiming this shit happened.
You know, but I mean, that is an interesting question. As a skeptic, what would convince you? I mean, we could all be wrong about everything. I will never, ever say that I am 100% correct about something because I know that there is a chance that I'm wrong. Scientists have been wrong. Everybody has been wrong about something. Despite the fact that I am a skeptic when it comes to ghosts, I could be convinced otherwise. The question is, what would have to happen in order for me to be convinced?
That's fair. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Immediately when I hear true story, horror story, I immediately think, well, this is a bunch of nonsense. So every conversation that I have about this movie is in the realm of fiction.
Yes.
Not taking for a second that these were real people.
So let's talk a little bit more about this ending because I got to talk specifically about the iceberg. Basically what happens is the ghost entity gets frozen into a literal iceberg. And then we get shown what I think might be the most unique explosion scene in any movie ever because it's an explosion with absolutely no fire.
I don't know. None of the physics in that scene made any sense at all, down to the visuals. Like, I was like, what am I looking at? I could not figure out what I was seeing so much of it was just nonsense. It's just like, this movie really had my attention, and this is how it let me down. And then also, my biggest complaint about this movie was that there's no resolution. Let's go with the fact that it destroyed the ghost. Well, then we get this follow-up that says, it didn't destroy the ghost. And then she goes back home and then has another experience. I mean, like, there was no resolution to a movie where you never visibly see the antagonist.
All right, Corn Diff, what did you see in the end? Tell me about the iceberg.
I just kept thinking about Dr. Freeze.
Yeah.
It was so... It just felt a lot like that, and like Arnold Schwarzenegger was gonna just pop out of there.
Chill out, bird boy.
I was hoping to make out more of a figure than what we got.
It was just a rock. That's all it was. It was such a letdown.
I think that for me, the most personified that we ever get to see the entity was actually in one of the earlier sequences, in one of those lightning finger sequences when they have the electricity going. You get to see the entity as sort of like a fetal, like it looks almost like a fetus to me. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was really interesting. And so to me, that iceberg, it was literally just giant fetus that killed the Titanic. Is, I guess, I don't know. It was just it was weird, but I do think, Luigi, to your point, I love an ambiguous ending. I am a big fan of, I don't know what the fuck happened. No matter how you feel about the end of this movie, you cannot deny that the last line of this movie is perhaps one of the best lines in cinema history. Because demon voice saying "Welcome home" is the perfect thing to happen after iceberg explosion, and you will never convince me otherwise.
I rewound that because I thought, did I hear that right?
You did.
I literally thought maybe it was background noise that I misinterpreted as "Welcome home, cunt," but I was like, oh no, that they really said that. And the weirdest part about that, I agree with you. Great way to end a movie, or great line to end the movie. But the strangest part about that scene is you see her smirk at it and then walk. And I'm like, what? That seems very incongruous to what just happened. She's like, I win. Fuck you.
I think she is winning. She's going back to her family. She's saying, fuck you, you don't control me anymore.
But then we learned that it still did. Like, that's the part where I'm just like, nothing lines up.
We to her. Maybe it just calls her a cunt. Maybe like it wakes up and it's like, have some coffee, pussy. Like, that's fine with me. I don't care. You can say whatever the fuck you want about me as long as you're not raping me. Like,
I imagine getting called a cunt in your own house would probably wear on your nerves eventually.
I mean, compared to the alternative, it's the better option to go with.
You know how like people have like refrigerators that talk to them and they're like, hello, Corn Diff, what would you like me to set the temperature to? I would, if I had a refrigerator like that, I would program it to call me cunt. Like, I feel like I'm teaching Siri to call me cunt. Like, I think that is a funny thing to do. And so
I felt like that was a bold move for this movie to end it that way.
It was so brave.
Yes, it was so brave.
So bold, so brave.
And I'm being sincere here in that could have ruined the movie, honestly. It really could have. Like, if you think about everything that led up to that scene, it could have been interpreted as the ghost winning. It could have been interpreted as that anti-feminist, thing that we talked about. But somehow it gets an ambiguity across that seems very intentional. It is trying to tell you, we still don't really know. It was an effective way to end the movie while also being very vulgar. Like, I don't know how to say that. It seems like a dichotomy of being beautiful and ugly at the same time.
I think you're exactly correct. And I think that this movie is interesting because despite the fact that it focuses so heavily on rape, it is not a particularly vulgar movie. Despite the fact that we see rapes constantly throughout the movie, including within the first 7 minutes of the movie. It is not vulgar until it uses the word cunt.
Yeah.
It's a very I agree with Corn Dip. It was very brave. And I say that both as a joke and in all actuality. It really was a really interesting way to end this movie. It feels both powerful and what's the equivalent of emasculating somebody for a woman? Effeminating? That's not a fucking word. It feels like it's stripping her of her womanhood, but still, she doesn't give a fuck, and that's what that smirk is.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, I could see that.
It felt like they were old adversaries that were there. It's like, here we go again.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it felt like a Western. Like these two people are having a showdown almost.
Does this happen with every movie where when you talk it out, it becomes so much more obvious what the themes are?
We just talked about this movie for probably about an hour and a half. I could talk about this movie for another 5 hours and we still would not touch on all of the things that I wanted to talk about. And I don't usually feel that way. It's very irregular for me to say, boy, I truly want to dissect every single moment of this film. And boy, do I really, really, really want to dissect every moment of this film.
To some extent, I thought the movie was exploitative for at least, 20 minutes or so. And then I was like, oh, wow, there's some genuine emotion and feeling here. But it's funny that I still didn't pick up on everything. I was really trying to.
I'm actually going to have to rewatch it.
Yeah, yay! You're going to like it so much more the second time. And you get to see fake Barbara Hershey boobs again, but real Barbara Hershey Bush, I'm pretty sure, so...
I thought that had to be special effects. Holy shit.
That was 80s for it.
Listen, just don't call her a One of the things that I thought was interesting that I saw as I was doing a little bit of research was whenever any of these paranormal movies get made, people always try to claim that like crazy stuff happened behind the scenes. Like The Omen is a very classic example of that. These horrible things happened while they were making The Omen because it was an omen. In this movie, when they were filming the scene where Bill, the son, gets attacked by the electrical currents, he gets thrown across the room at one point and he broke his arm during the filming of that sequence. And that was a real thing that happened in the actual case, is that one of the people who was involved in it actually had their arm broken. And yet, despite the fact that that happened, despite the fact that you could have tied the filming of this movie to the reality, the quote-unquote reality of what happened in the real haunting, they never marketed it as, oh my God, the entity is here in real life. And I thought that that was also really unique because that makes me think that despite the fact that this is a ghost movie, they're not making a ghost movie in the way that we see people usually profiteering off of ghost movies or ghost books or ghost whatever the hell they're trying to do. And I think that's another thing that makes the entity so extremely unique in this realm of what I would call trash.
And to your point, despite the fact that the genre of this movie is a horror movie, I don't think there was anything that intentionally tried to scare the audience. It tried to make you uncomfortable, which I feel probably way more difficult as a filmmaker to do.
I feel like the music tried to make you scared. I do. I feel like it was trying to cause panic throughout the entire scene with that steady ass music.
I can see what you're saying. It made me anxious. Like it gave me anxiety where I was just like, stop this music, like stop it, stop. Like I couldn't think.
The director actually is quite adamant. He does not believe that this is a horror movie. It's interesting to have a director say something like that. Now, he wouldn't have been the person who wrote the score, and he wouldn't have been the person who edited it together. So because of that, that could be why we're all experiencing that anxiety and horrific feeling. I will tell you that last night when I was watching this movie, I don't usually watch anything scary late at night, including I won't even do like a Simpsons Treehouse of Horror late at night. That's like how much of a wuss I am in the evening times. I get easily spooked. Despite the fact that I love horror, I get very easily spooked. So I watched this last night, and as soon as that music came on, I was like, no, I gotta revisit this in the morning. I will never sleep. I will never sleep.
The only thing I could think of is like, if I were trying to like, give directions to someone on a road and that music was going on, I wouldn't be able to think through it. It was just like, I need this to stop. I need this to stop. And again, great filmmaking. By the way, also to your thing about saying that the director doesn't consider this a horror movie. Did you know William Friedkin also has said the same thing about The Exorcist? He doesn't believe it is, and I agree with him 100%. Yeah. And if you've read the novel, you'll understand why. It's a murder mystery. It's not even a horror movie.
That's interesting. I did not find out any of that information when I was researching this, but I know that Shout Factory recently put out a release of this, and it has tons and tons of special features. So I suspect that the answer to that lies on that release, which came out, I think, in 2019, someplace around then. I'm happy that this movie is starting to get a little bit more attention than it was in the 80s with all the hatred that it got from the feminist activist groups. I'm glad that so many directors are loving it and giving nods to it like Tarantino did in Inglourious Basterds. I think that it is just wonderful that it is getting talked about. And one of the things that I like to do on my channel is I like to rate movies on a scale of 7 thumbs up. I would love to know what both of you would rate this on a scale of 7 thumbs up.
Before hearing both of y'all's takes on it, I would have given it a 5 at least. But now, after hearing the different takes on it, I'm going to say 6.
Yeah, I like that. Besides having anxiety when you were watching it, what were some of the other major emotions that you were having?
Frustration when they broke that damn helium out. It's just like where are they going with this? And it took me, that ending kind of took me out of it a little bit.
So if you could have changed something, it would have been the ending?
Yeah, it would have been a different science experiment or something. Yeah. More than just these mechanized helium canisters that are running around shooting at people.
All right, Luigi, what about you? 7 thumbs up. How many would you give this here movie?
I got to tell you, I came in really wanting to shit on this movie. It was uncomfortable, and there were just places that just seemed so disjointed in my layman viewing. I would have probably said a 4. And the ending is just unforgivable because it just derails all of the investment, all of the emotional investment in the movie. But it's really interesting talking about it. I'm realizing how layered and deep and philosophical this movie really is, while also handling such a odd method of telling it. I think there was some real expert filmmaking in this movie, so I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree with Corndiff. I'm going to give it a 6.
I came into this movie, I mean, again, you suggested that we watch this, and I was like, oh, we are going to get together. We're going to shit on this movie. It's going to be a funny little episode. I'm not going to have to put in any effort. I'm just going to get to make fun of a stupid, dumb movie. I have like 17 pages of notes about this movie that we did not even get into because I have so many thoughts about this movie that I can't even get them out of my mouth fast enough to make any sense whatsoever. It's entirely possible that not a single word that I have said during this last hour and a half has made any sense because I can't stop thinking about this. I fell in love with this movie in the first 10 minutes. I struggled with this movie. I felt attached to the characters. And unlike both Luigi and Corndiff, I didn't hate the ending despite the fact that it was total nonsense. It was total nonsense, but all of that was erased as soon as they said, "Welcome home, cunt." I didn't even care about the iceberg. Yes, it was absurd, but the entire idea of parapsychology is absurd. So of course they would create some dumb experiment that's needlessly unexplainable. Of course they would do that. That makes sense to me. And that's what the real world probably is of these things. You know, using dowsing rods and whatever the fuck else they do. It's all nonsense. So of course it's nonsense.
I feel like maybe we've been using the wrong term for ending. I feel like maybe we need to distinguish that. We're saying the iceberg ending and then the welcome home cunt ending. And we shouldn't do that. We should like distinguish those because the welcome home cunt was
amazing.
Like I said, it's a weird beauty in it. There was a very weird positivity to it. You know, it's funny, you're talking about things that we haven't talked about. Not once in this whole time did we even mention her father, you know, the issue with her dad. And like, that is a huge aspect to the context of the movie.
And she was a young mother, and the father of her child died. And so, I mean, she had many, many emotional traumas that could cause her to personify her demons. Again, that's the debate of all of this. That's what makes this movie so compelling to me, is that it jam-packed all of that into 2 hours. And I went into this movie thinking 2 hours was at least 30 minutes too long. I have come out of this thinking it was a perfect length. It was perfect pacing. It was interestingly shot. It was beautiful. It was quiet when it needed to get quiet, and it was loud and terrifying and anxiety inducing when it needed to be. And I would give it a 7 out of 7 thumbs up. This is my new favorite haunting movie.
Interesting.
By far. I loved this. I will be trying to sell this movie to every single person who I ever talk films to, because I can't say enough good about it. Well, thank you guys both so much for coming and joining me to talk about this. Thank you again so much for suggesting it.
Thank you.
I truly, you guys have introduced me to what is probably now in my top 100 of all time movies, which is saying a lot for me. It might even be in top 50 and maybe even in top 20. I will be honest, this is just, the more times that I watch this, I'm sure the more I'm going to fall in love with it. So you guys have given me very much to think about, and I appreciate the heck out of that. I would love it if you would both just let everybody know where they can come and find all of the amazing stuff that you guys are both doing.
Only thing I've got going on is the channel, on my channel on YouTube, at Corndiff. Do a show Tuesdays and Thursdays called WGNN. The rest of the cool shit I do is with Luigi. Luigi, you want to tell them about it?
Yes, Skeptical Robot on my channel at Papa_Electrico. We are a show based on reason and logic and the occasional fart joke.
Occasional my ass.
We haven't really, things are changing behind the scenes and haven't really set up a schedule, but for right now we're doing Fridays. I also do a couple of shows on Hackride Studios. I do Unboxing Eric, which is a show dedicated to Eric the Midget, and we have actually just recently started Unboxing Riley Martin. It's so much fun if you are fans of the old Howard Stern Whack Packers. We go through all of their appearances and audio that they made on the show. A lot of fun, and hoping to actually start doing a few more members only content with Miss Kaylee here, and hopefully we can get some of that going.
I would love that. Thank you guys both again so much for coming to join me and talking about The Entity, and thank you guys all so much for watching. From Booger and I and Corndiff and Luigi, we really appreciate you all hanging out, so thanks. Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
What are you doing, you fucking weirdo?